Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Veterinary Business Podcast, your ultimate resource for developing a successful veterinary practice and career. I'm Ryan Davies, a digital marketing advisor with Equa Marketing and one of the co-hosts of the Veterinary Business Podcast. On this podcast, as you know, we love to bring you insights and experience and expertise from industry-leading doctors, experts, and thought leaders, covering a wide range of topics, including practice management, marketing strategies, leadership development, HR best practices, AI, legal, and much more. Or whether you are a practicing veterinarian or a practice owner, practice manager, or a student studying in the field, this podcast is tailored to help you navigate the unique challenges and opportunities in the business of veterinary medicine. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to visit www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com for additional resources and tools to help support and fuel your growth. And remember, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, YouTube Music, Spotify, and all of the popular podcast platforms. Today, I am very excited to chat with Kristina Bergsten, an attorney and founder of the animal law firm. Kristina is also an active team member at the Center for Animal Litigation, a nonprofit organization fighting for the underdog, and also hosts her own podcast. So I've got somebody else with me today that's polished in this game. It's going to be a great conversation. So Kristina, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You know what? I'm going to get you to color up anything else that I may have missed there about yourself, Kristina, for our audience. And before we dive into our topic around veterinary malpractice today, so I'll get you to give us a bit more of a background.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, no, it was a fabulous introduction. I appreciate it. I would just add that we're in 4 states currently. We're working our way towards all 50. We're in Colorado, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. And yes, we're fighting for the underdog in all 4 states, hopefully 50 soon. And we do all sorts of animal-related litigation, like pet custody disputes, service animal discrimination, representation, dog bite defense, and so much more.
I would love, I'm going to dive into it more because I bet you there's so many different areas that are covered around that, and some amazing stories and things that have been inspiring for pet parents to be able to be heard and have somewhere to go and a voice. But I know today we want to really dive into veterinary malpractice, and that's a huge topic and something that's, I think, maybe even overlooked or not considered in the industry as much as it is in, the human side of things. But tell us a little bit about what veterinary malpractice is and some of the, the situations surrounding it.
Sure. It's just like any other professional malpractice. So just like medical malpractice or legal malpractice, it's where a professional such as a veterinarian deviates from the standard of care for a veterinarian. So it's not necessarily like, oh, you made a mistake, so therefore it's malpractice. It's a little bit more than that. It's more of, like the classic example for human medical malpractice is you leave a sponge or a tool inside the person. Well, that same sort of thing can unfortunately happen with animals as well. And so it's those kinds of mistakes where it's like the veterinarian more or less didn't do what a veterinarian should in that situation.
Amazing. So I think that like you said, it kind of covers off, and I'm sure everybody listening understands, what malpractice is and some of the issues that can arise from it. But let's kind of talk about the preventative measures around this. So starting with, I guess, client communication is one of the foremost things that comes to mind, and how that is essential in avoiding any veterinary malpractice claims.
Sure. I think, with the advent, as technology becomes more and more a part of our everyday lives to the extent it isn't already, I've seen some veterinarians who start recording their individual visits and have some sort of AI software dictate the audio recording into written notes that then gets added into the client file. So, I mean, when it comes to client communication and just good record keeping, I think those two things kind of go hand in hand, right? It's client communication, of course, like in the moment, which can sometimes be hard because the client might be emotional or might just not understand, and no matter how much you break it down, they just don't understand. And so making sure that you have really good, clear notes of what happened and when. I would also say another thing that I run into that I see a lot is, and can sometimes be perceived as, changing the records or altering the records after the fact. Is that make sure that when you're entering your records into the client file, that you're doing it as contemporaneously as you can to the appointment. Waiting a few days to do it is not going to be good. One, because you're not going to remember everything that was said, and two, hindsight's 2020. And if you aren't putting in what was said at the time, and then you enter it in a few days later, and something happened in the interim, then it's going to look like you were responding to the client's outreach and being upset, and it's going to look like you altered the records. So in order to keep everybody as honest as possible, it's good to do things as contemporaneously as possible, to protect yourself and to make sure there's no accusations that you did something untoward.
And you mentioned there, so of course, record keeping and communication, all important. When you're discussing this, or when you have conversations around this with practice owners, what other practices would you say are ways to improve management in order to avoid any potential areas around veterinary malpractice beyond the record keeping side of things?
That's a really good question. I mean, I really think that the records are a veterinarian's best friend. I think follow-up calls are also, especially when it's more serious, when, maybe you're treating a dog who suffered a dog bite injury and there's drainage tubes involved and there's follow-up appointments. I think maybe checking in with the pet parent in between appointments is also a good practice. Maybe asking them to send you pictures of the injury as it develops over time, in between appointments. And this stuff can be automated. I work with a vet. I'm a pet parent myself, of course, and I go to the vet a lot. And that's actually one of the practices that my veterinarian uses. And they have these things automated, like I said, where it's just, their staff gets a reminder and they send me a text message saying, hey, could you send us a picture of Maggie's. My dog has chronic allergies. Her name's Maggie, and she has chronic allergies. So so I have to send pictures periodically of her feet in between appointments because she has all these feet issues. But I mean, those sort of things can be automated, or at least the reminders can be automated. And if you have support staff and you have the ability to text or to email your clients or to call them, then I think that is also a very helpful tool as well, because sometimes I will see situations where it's maybe a surgery or a broken limb or something more serious, and there's no communication between the clinic and the pet parent between appointments. And some appointments might not be for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the situation. And in between then, the pet parent is sitting there saying like, well, I just trusted my vet. I didn't know any better. I'm not a medical professional, and I didn't catch that, I should have notified the clinic that there was an infection or something like that. A lot of times too, I mean, again, communication and record keeping is just paramount. I really can't think of anything more important to do, but I've also seen situations where pet parents will call the clinic and they will talk to support staff, or front desk people. Or maybe they'll get the veterinarian for a few minutes in between appointments, and the veterinarian is just over the phone, quickly trying to answer the question while, everything else is going on in his or her day. And they're not really getting the full scope, and they're kind of trying to treat and diagnose something over the phone. Or the support staff is relaying messages and it's going back and forth and everything gets lost in translation. So, I mean, again, like clear communication, taking a minute and saying, I'm in the middle of a bunch of appointments. I can't squeeze you in today, but we'll try to squeeze you in tomorrow. Or why don't you send us a picture or a video of what's going on? And just doing as much as you can to try to protect yourself by getting a visual look at what's going on. And I mean, obviously, a picture of an injury isn't going to be as good as a physical examination, but at least you've taken the extra step to try.
Yeah. I like that, and I love that already you've broken down using, modern technology as a friend here, right? To really make sure that you are empowering it to help and protect yourself. Like you said, use AI, break down the notes, put it as part of the patient file, record, encourage people to send photos and videos in instead of, okay, well, I can only do it, I guess the traditional way in terms of you've got to bring them in. I've got to see, put some steps in place. And there's systems out there and things that are out there that can really help enable you to do things more efficiently and faster. And again, help with some of this, some of these pieces in terms of what needs to go in place in order to be successful. And I also love that point of it's really, really important from a staff training standpoint, right? That you need to make sure that that is part of this as well, and that they're very aware of what is happening there. I want to talk a little bit about, maybe what happens if it happens, right? How do you handle a claim around this? Are there steps a practice owner can take if they do end up getting approached about this, whether it's a threatened about it or actually sued about this, and deciding how to settle versus fighting a claim around something like this?
Sure, that's a great question. I would say first things first is if you are approached by a pet parent because of a situation that went wrong, the first thing out of the pet parent's mouth when they talk to me is, I was treated so badly. After this veterinarian killed my pet, that they didn't even say they were sorry. All they said was, well, or, they still went ahead and they charged me. And I'm not saying that saying you're sorry or not charging somebody for something when something goes, I'm not saying that that's going to make it go away, but I am going to say that it definitely takes the sting out of it. I often joke that I feel like attorneys in general, but me specifically, wouldn't have a job if people had better customer service. And unfortunately, veterinarians, they're a profession, but they're also kind of a service profession in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is doing good customer service. So that also goes for your support staff. I mean, the amount of times that I've had people call and complain because the way that they were treated by support staff is terrible. And sometimes it is objectively very, very cold and very, very unfeeling. And so I think, you don't want to send them a card saying, I'm so sorry that I messed up, because obviously that'll get used against you in litigation. But I think when confronted with it, you got to just have that hard conversation, and you've got to just say over the phone, I'm really sorry. We did everything we could, whatever you think is appropriate. But I think if you convey and you can empathize with the person and try to validate their feelings, that will help calm them down so that they won't end up calling someone like me. In the event of a lawsuit, I mean, obviously refer to your insurance carrier. I find that a lot of times it's the insurance carrier who makes the decision whether or not to fight it. That said, I know that there are some insurance policies. A lot of times Zurich is one of them. And I know Zurich represents or covers a lot of veterinarians. Zurich will have a clause in its policy typically that allows the veterinarian to have a little bit more control over whether or not something is settled. Some other insurance policies, you kind of don't really hear from the carrier unless you're being called in for a deposition. But to the extent that you have some control over it, I mean, it's going to have to be a conversation with your insurance carrier. Obviously, the stress and the time and the energy that goes into this sort of thing is worth thinking about, because even if you're not that involved in the day-to-day process, you've still got to go in for a deposition. You've still got to answer these discovery questions. You've still got to show up to court at some point for the trial. And that's stressful. And also, too, if you get an adverse judgment against you, not only is that going to be fair game for a vet board complaint as well, but I mean, that becomes public record. And, you don't want somebody Googling your name and a lawsuit being the first thing they see.
Right. Absolutely. You mentioned there, and I mean, as somebody from a little bit outside the industry, I'd love to understand, are there, what type of insurance coverage should veterinary practices have to protect against this? Are there a variety from state to state, depending on what's happening, from the board in that state, or is it a general blanket coverage that exists?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that Zurich is one of the main companies
Okay.
that provides coverage, and they tend to be, like I said, they tend to give the veterinarians more deference than some of the other ones. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, but yeah, I don't really know. But I mean, you just want to make sure you read your policy just like you do. I mean, hopefully you do for your homeowner's insurance
Yeah.
or your car insurance. To the extent that you don't read those, you should definitely read your malpractice insurance.
There's certain ones we just go click accept and go with terms and conditions, and then there's other ones that might be a little more important to go through line by line. This is probably one of those ones that is incredibly important from that standard. I want to talk as well, because you kind of mentioned it before about the personality behind the vet practice and things like that. There's also, ethical obligations that veterinarians can have that impact claims, and professional guidelines and standards that are set by associations that can influence it and things to that effect. I love the fact that you said, it really comes down to you being the front of your practice and kind of taking ownership and, communicating, having empathy, explaining what the procedure was and why you went with it and all of these sorts of things. Can you dive in a little bit more about that side of things around those ethical and professional standards that exist and how they kind of impact those claims, or I guess can help divert them?
I can try. That is a big question. So, yeah, I'm not even really sure where to begin with that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different associations, and each association is going to have its own guidelines. Those are
Mhm.
not necessarily what you get sued under, right? So the
Right.
American Veterinary Medical Association, I forget, AVMA.
Yeah.
Yes. Not great with acronyms. I've got allergy brain, so but yeah, I mean, that's not what you get sued under. It's always your state veterinary Practices Act. It might be called something different in your state. In Pennsylvania, it's called the Veterinary Practices Act. In New Jersey, it's called like the Veterinary Medical Association or the Veterinary Medical Act. I forget. So, I mean, that's really what you want to make sure you're paying attention to and make sure you're following, because some states are more specific than other states, and some states have violations for certain things that other states don't. Like New Jersey and Pennsylvania are very different in that New Jersey, I feel like, is a lot more relaxed and it's more focused on the business and the advertising side of of veterinary practices as opposed to the practice of medicine itself. Whereas Pennsylvania, I feel like, more stringently regulates the actual practice of medicine, and has more detail in its statute for what is and isn't allowed for the practice. So Colorado's kind of similar to Pennsylvania, where it kind of covers both really well. So I mean, it just depends on where you're at. So that's what I would look at. And I mean, as far as like ethics go, that I think is where it gets a little different from medical malpractice or legal malpractice. Like the ethics of it are a little bit different, right? Because under the law, you're working on property, you're not working on people.
Right.
And so I feel like the ethics are kind of under the law a little bit looser than when you're talking about other forms of professional malpractice. So I think at the end of the day, you just have to remember that the reason you went into veterinary medicine is because you love what you do and you love animals. And you just have to remember that if you were in this pet parent's shoes, how would you feel? What would you want to know? And it gets hard, right? Because, as a veterinary practice, you're kind of focused more on volume than you are on anything else really, in terms of a business model. So, because it's not like humans where you have to come back. I mean, you do have to come back every 12 to 6 months, depending. But I mean, it's a little bit different in terms of, I think, how you manage your business. So what I'm trying to say is that it's very easy for veterinarians to get overwhelmed because of the amount of appointments that you have to have in a day. But when something goes wrong, it's really important to like take time out and try to really empathize with the pet parent. So I don't know if that really answers the question
No,
in
I think
terms of.
that was perfect. That was absolutely bang on for that answer in terms of, the traditional differences and things of how people view malpractice, and then how it hits a little differently in the veterinary business and veterinary practice world of things, right? So I kind of, as we start to kind of wind down here, I wanted to ask, are there any other common questions or concerns that you get from either practice owners or pet owners that you tend to feel that maybe we hadn't covered here around this area? Anything else that we've missed, you think?
I don't. No, I don't think so. I mean, that's another really good question.
I'm sure you get hundreds and hundreds of different one-offs, right? That's got to be one of the interesting things about this is probably no two things are the same. Like everything is fairly unique in its standing, no?
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the themes repeat, but the facts are always different.
Right.
And like I said, I mean, the vast majority of calls that I get have more to do with bad customer service. And I really just can't emphasize that enough. And sometimes you're going to get that client who is just wants to blame you.
Yeah.
And you can be as empathetic as humanly possible, and it still won't work. And in those situations, I would just say, just try to remain patient. And then just at some point, you're going to have to draw a line in the sand and be like, Mr. So-and-so, I understand that you lost your parrot, but, this is everything that could be done. This is why we did it. We're going to have to end this conversation because I can't
Move
keep.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the stages of grief, and anger is one of them, right? And people are looking for somebody to lash out to. And of course, this is probably one of those things, right? Is when they get angry, they're like, well, who can I blame for this? Whose fault is this? And it's nobody's fault necessarily, but they want to find somebody other than themselves that they can take their anger and frustration out, right? So that's such a key point. I love the fact that you said, that part of being a veterinary practice and a business owner is understanding and having empathy and knowing this is going to come. This is the hardest, if not anything else, the hardest part about dealing with your clients and the pet parents that you're seeing. Obviously, has got to be that emotional state that happens and the wide range that could possibly come in. With that, as we kind of close off, just sort of crystal ball looking into the future, are there any views that you have or any hopes that you have of how you're hoping that maybe veterinary medicine or malpractice or anything around this area changes in the future to better protect everybody involved?
That is such a good question. And at the risk of alienating your listeners, I am hoping that the law does change and recognize pets as more than property.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, and I think that it would benefit veterinarians in the long term, is that if pets are recognized as more than property, then when your insurance company takes over and they very callously respond, well, you bought that dog for $200, so we'll give you $200, which just obviously sends pet parents into a
Whole
rage.
other sort of rage, exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, I think, but then that reflects on the veterinarian, right? Because it's not the insurance agent is just the agent, right? They're just like the negotiator, but it's
Yeah.
the veterinarian who bears the responsibility of what's being said by this agent, right? But you don't have control over that. So I think like if pets are considered as more than property, then the pet parent will feel more respected in the process. And two, that would also increase protections for veterinarians on the insurance side, right? So, you might have someone, I mean, I've had clients like this where they've spent 40, 50, 60 grand to save their pet. And, I'm not, I mean, veterinary malpractice insurance can cover a wide range of things, but a lot of times what ends up happening is that there's a big, huge fight over nickel and diming one another to try to get large portions of the cost dropped. But I just think that if there's that pets are considered more than property, there'll be better protections for veterinarians through the insurance company, because the insurance company will start taking it more seriously. And then the pet parents will feel more respected in the process. And I just think that overall that will help everybody in the long term. And it kind of helps the pets in the long term, which is what everybody really wants, because it's like, well, if the insurance companies are taking this more seriously, then there's going to be more development of insurance for pets that actually does cover a wider range of things, which means that veterinarians can start providing a wider range of services and maybe more in-depth services that would otherwise be cost prohibitive. And I think everybody wins in that way.
I absolutely, I just sit here and I'm nodding my head and going, yes, 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 yes. As somebody who I had 3, I have 2 dogs now. I had my last dog that just passed. Well, it was about a year ago, and I still say just. It feels like she just passed, but it's been a year ago. She needed a whole hip back replacement thing going, and it ended up not being what ended up being her issue when she went. But when we were talking about treatment options, one of them was this treatment where they're like, well, we fly her to Colorado and it's like a $40,000 surgery. And we're sitting here going, okay, count your pennies. Like, I don't want to let her go. And maybe we should do this, right? We went through a whole bunch of other these other treatments, but still, if it wasn't so cost prohibitive, we would be looking at other options and insurance and things like that. And then you'd have vets that are probably not so scared to offer those treatments, right? Or worried about, look, if you don't go through with this, I'm not responsible for what happens. So right. It resonates and hits home so hard, that comment. And like you said, I think it's really, like you mentioned, it's not just for the pet owners and the pet parents that are saying, yeah, like, okay, that dog that I got, she was $90 from the Humane Society, right? I wouldn't want somebody to say, here's your $90 check, go back to the Humane Society and get a replacement, because that's not how it is. So right. I absolutely love that commentary. I think that is an amazing look from both sides of the fence to say, this is why this is so important. So Kristina, I know as we're kind of winding down here, I want to give our audience a chance as well to connect with you. I'm sure that they have questions. I'm sure there are people who are looking for an expert like you to understand more. How would our audience be able to get in contact and learn more about you and the Animal Law Firm and everything that you do out there?
Yeah, thanks so much. Obviously, we have a website, theanimallawfirm.com. You can find us on Facebook under the same name, LinkedIn under Kristina Bergsten, TikTok, of course, YouTube. What am I forgetting? Instagram. I mean, all the socials. We're doing all the things the kids are doing these days. So just Google the Animal Law Firm and something will come up, and happy to talk to anyone, answer questions, and help out however I can.
I love it. Kristina, thank you so much for joining us here today, for joining me, and for enlightening our audience, giving them, so much to think about and some great information, some great ways that they can also help improve their practice, their communication with their team, everything to really help them grow their practice. Really love this episode on veterinary malpractice, and I'm hoping we're going to have you back and we can do this again sometime. This would be great.
I would love that. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much. And also, as always, have to take a moment to thank our listeners. We can't do what we do without you, and we appreciate each and every one of you. If you like our podcast, please kindly share it with your colleagues and friends on social media. And don't forget to leave us a review wherever you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. It is your kind words and reviews that are going to help others find other doctors and practice owners and bring you amazing guests like Kristina here today to teach you and to help you grow your practice and be the best practice owner you can be. So until next time, keep striving for excellence, make positive impacts in the lives of your patients and pet parents. And I wish everybody an amazing week ahead. Thanks so much, everybody, and take care.